the vast Arizona desert, where highways suddenly transform into covert battlegrounds for illegal migration routes colliding with massive drug smuggling corridors. In Maricopa County, the most populous area of the state, law enforcement from the human smuggling unit to heavily armed SWAT teams faces off against transnational criminal networks. It all started as usual, with the flashing lights from a patrol car and an SUV breaking the law. But as the officers approached, they noticed something unusual. A strong smell of marijuana wafted from the vehicle. The search led to a shocking discovery. Over 400 pounds of marijuana, worth more than $2 million, was packed tightly in the trunk. That same night, the SWAT team made a surprise raid on what seemed like an ordinary house in the suburbs of Phoenix, uncovering a meth lab and quickly preventing a home invasion shortly afterward. The intersection of human trafficking, drug smuggling, and violence clearly reflects the complexity and multidimensional nature of this battle. The war at the Arizona border has truly uncovered a particularly dangerous criminal network. Discover the truth behind this by liking, sharing, and subscribing to Military Power now. The deserts and highways of Arizona have long been more than just empty land. They are front lines where migration routes and drug corridors collide. Maricopa County, the state's most populated area, sits directly on this pressure point, making it a constant focus for law enforcement. Here, the sheriff's office deploys a mix of specialized units, from the human smuggling unit to heavily armed SWAT teams, all tasked with breaking apart networks that stretch across the border. Their patrols are not routine traffic stops, but coordinated saturation operations, designed to create pressure on smugglers and force them into the open. It usually starts with something small, like a car going too fast, a license plate from another state, or windows that look too dark. But then it can turn into something much bigger, as deputies check for hidden passengers or illegal cargo. They follow their training and look only at clear signs, not at someone's appearance or ethnicity, a rule put in place after federal courts demanded change. Today, oversight from federal monitors ensures that every stop must meet constitutional requirements. Behind these operations lies a difficult balance. Arizona law, shaped by measures like Senate Bill 1070, requires officers to determine immigration status for those arrested, while federal agencies such as ICE conduct interviews inside county jails. That structure has created a direct link between local arrests and federal deportation cases. At the same time, community reforms launched under new leadership aim to rebuild trust and show that enforcement can be both tough and lawful. The stage is set for a series of events that reveal just how complex this battle has become. But what happens when a single stop uncovers not only hidden migrants, but millions of dollars worth of narcotics? The patrol began at dusk, when the desert air cooled and the highways grew crowded with long-distance traffic. Smugglers often use the cover of night to avoid detection, making these hours particularly challenging for law enforcement. Convoys of sheriff's cruisers, joined by undercover vehicles, spread out along key routes leading north from the border. Their mission was clear: intercept both human smuggling convoys and drug loads before they reached the city centers. The human smuggling unit, created to deal with a flood of illegal crossings, worked hand in hand with narcotics detectives. One vehicle might carry a dozen passengers crammed into the back, while another could be packed with compressed marijuana bales or meth wrapped to avoid detection. Each stop was carried out under strict procedures, with body cameras and supervisors ensuring that federal guidelines were met. The presence of observers and media sometimes made the work even harder, yet commanders insisted that transparency was necessary for legitimacy. During these operations, law enforcement often faced the unexpected. A traffic violation could suddenly turn into a large-scale drug case. Deputies recalled instances where vehicles stopped for speeding revealed not only undocumented passengers, but also firearms and bundles of narcotics. The dual role of these patrols highlighted the reality that criminal groups often use the same supply chains to move people and drugs. For police, separating one crime from another was impossible. The networks were fused together, creating a single battlefield across the highways. The scale of these missions was impressive. Reports noted that in some sweeps, more than a dozen vehicles were pulled over in a single night, with dozens of individuals detained and multiple arrests made for possession and transport of controlled substances. By flooding the roads with marked and unmarked units, sheriffs aimed to send a clear message to traffickers. Every route was under watch, every crossing point was contested. The element of surprise was crucial, as smugglers never knew where the next checkpoint would appear or which unmarked sedan might suddenly light up with sirens. Critics sometimes described the approach as heavy-handed, but commanders countered that saturation patrols were both legal and necessary. Federal oversight after earlier controversies meant that every action was reviewed and documented. In practice, this meant long briefings before each operation, reminders about constitutional protections, and strict rules on what could justify a stop. The sheriff's office stressed that their deputies focused on behavior, not appearance, to avoid the mistakes of the past. As the night wore on, the pattern repeated. Vehicles flagged, searches conducted, suspects detained. Each case added to a larger picture of a region under siege from both cartels and smuggling rings. The saturation strategy showed that Arizona's highways had become more than transport routes. They were contested ground in a hidden war. But what happens when one of these seemingly routine stops reveals not only hidden passengers, but hundreds of pounds of narcotics worth millions of dollars? The stop began like countless others, with flashing lights cutting across the dark highway. A sheriff's cruiser had pulled behind a speeding SUV with out-of-state plates, the kind of vehicle often overlooked in the constant stream of night traffic. As the deputy approached, the first clue struck immediately, a heavy scent of marijuana drifting through the window. Training dictated the next steps, and the officer called for backup while keeping his eyes on the nervous driver. When the rear hatch was opened, the scene inside confirmed suspicions. Stacked tightly together were compressed bales wrapped in plastic and lined with baby wipes meant to disguise the odor. The bundles filled the back of the vehicle, weighing down the suspension and nearly pressing against the roof. Detectives on site counted 50-plus packages, each marked for fast transfer once inside the city. A field test was carried out with precision. A small sample was placed in a vial, and within seconds the chemical turned purple, proving the presence of THC. The final estimate put the load between 400 and 600 pounds, worth more than $2 million on the street. Photographs documented the discovery from multiple angles, while body cameras captured every exchange. The seizure illustrated how quickly routine enforcement could escalate into a major narcotics case. Commanders explained that smugglers often relied on high-speed runs through the desert highways, betting that law enforcement could not check every car. Yet a single well-timed stop was enough to cripple a shipment worth millions and deliver a clear blow to the network behind it. For investigators, it also opened questions about who exactly would be trusted with cargo of this value and what ties they might have beyond the border. That question was answered sooner than expected when the identities of the suspects revealed a connection that shocked even the most experienced deputies. The next operation unfolded on a narrow stretch of highway where deputies spotted a pickup riding low, its suspension strained under unusual weight. When the vehicle was stopped and searched, the discovery was stark. 18 individuals crowded inside, 16 men and 2 women, concealed under blankets and pressed together in silence. Once the passengers were removed, the process followed strict guidelines. Each individual was photographed, logged, and transported to Maricopa County's intake facility. There, federal immigration officers from ICE conducted interviews to verify identity and status. Records confirmed that none carried legal documentation, and deportation cases were opened. Officials explained that this coordination between local law enforcement and federal authorities was designed to create efficiency, ensuring that migrants caught in smuggling operations were processed quickly and lawfully. Inside the jail system, the procedure was tightly monitored. Health checks were given to prevent medical emergencies, and translation services were used to make sure every detainee understood the steps ahead. Sheriff's representatives emphasized that while enforcement was firm, humanitarian standards were maintained. Food, water, and medical care were provided while cases were reviewed, Critics often question the system's fairness, but commanders pointed out that transparency was greater than in past decades, with independent observers allowed to track outcomes. The larger picture showed how migration routes and drug channels had become intertwined. Deputies noted that vehicles used for human transport sometimes also carried narcotics, while safe houses could hold both migrants and drugs. This overlap made separating cases difficult and forced officers to treat every stop as potentially involving multiple crimes. For the sheriff's office, this meant that immigration enforcement was no longer separate from narcotics control, but part of the same frontline battle. By dawn, the 18 migrants were transferred into federal custody, their journey north ending inside a secure facility. For investigators, the case was not unusual, but another sign of how smuggling networks operated on both sides of the border. Each person represented a story of risk and desperation. Yet for law enforcement, the duty was to enforce the law, as written. But not every operation involved only migrants. In some raids, deputies found entire houses converted into labs or caches filled with heroin, meth, and weapons. What happened when SWAT teams forced entry into these fortified sites? The night shifted into high gear as deputies, along with SWATs, stormed a known drug hotspot in the suburbs of Phoenix. A reliable tip had led law enforcement to a seemingly ordinary house tucked in a quiet neighborhood. But what they found inside was far from ordinary. The house was a fortress, fortified with hidden doors and elaborate security systems designed to keep prying eyes away from the operation running inside. This was no ordinary drug den. Inside, deputies discovered a makeshift meth lab, complete with all the necessary tools to produce crystal meth at a high volume. The air was thick with the sharp chemical scent of solvents, and everything from the floor to the ceiling showed signs of heavy use. Nearby, they found the raw ingredients for heroin production, bricks of powder waiting to be processed. As SWAT teams breached the door, there was no hesitation. They moved swiftly through the house, clearing rooms and securing the perimeter, the sound of boots on the floor mingling with the tense silence of a team that had practiced this moment countless times. A suspect, who had been preparing another batch of meth, was found near the back room. In his hand, a firearm lay in plain view, a clear indication that the stakes were higher than anticipated. The raid had been well coordinated. The SWAT officers were heavily armored, with each member of the team assigned a specific task to ensure swift resolution and minimal risk. Their goal was not only to secure the drugs, but also to neutralize any threat posed by the suspects. Law enforcement knew that when drugs like meth and heroin were involved, the risk of violence increased significantly. The firearms, the improvised weaponry found later, and the resistance put up by the suspects confirmed this. Once the house was secured, investigators found more than just drugs. Several stolen firearms were seized, hidden in the closets and under furniture. An underground network was being run from the house, tied to larger smuggling rings operating out of Mexico. The raid was part of an ongoing operation to disrupt cartel-controlled distribution points, a strategy designed to sever the flow of narcotics into U.S. cities. One of the most chilling aspects of the operation was what came next, a call about a home invasion in progress. The suspect in the meth lab case had connections to a violent gang believed to be targeting elderly residents. The call came in just as the SWAT team was wrapping up the raid. Within moments, they shifted focus, heading toward a nearby home where a gang was allegedly preparing to break in. With sirens blaring, they arrived just in time to stop an armed group from entering the home. The residents, elderly and vulnerable, had been targeted due to their perceived wealth and inability to defend themselves. The suspects, wearing ski masks and carrying knives, were apprehended before they could cause harm. Each operation revealed the complexities of the networks at play and underscored how criminals used every opportunity to expand their reach. As law enforcement continued to unravel these layers, the question remained, what would it take to fully dismantle these networks, especially when they reached so deeply into everyday life? While highway confrontations grab attention, another critical front plays out behind the gates of Maricopa County Jail. This is where suspects from arrests, such as drug trafficking soldiers or migrant groups, are processed for their final legal steps. At the intake center, alongside standard procedures, there is a desk marked with the number 7, the station of an ICE agent. The opening question, "Where were you born?" may serve as the first step toward a federal criminal case and ultimately deportation. This coordination, rooted in laws like SB 1070, forms an effective transition system from local arrests to federal deportation. However, the real challenge doesn't only come from outside. In January 2023, Sheriff Paul Penzone had to hold an emergency meeting to announce the arrest of a 26-year-old detention officer, Andres Salazar. He was accused of attempting to smuggle about 100 fentanyl pills and methamphetamine into the jail, substances that could be fatal in a detention environment. A young man has essentially destroyed his career and ultimately his life, Penzone declared, his voice filled with anger. The case was a shocking reminder of how deeply criminal organizations could infiltrate, leading the sheriff's office to install body scanners for all staff. These issues unfold against a complex legacy. For over 24 years, Tent City, the outdoor jail with pink uniforms and summer temperatures reaching up to 54 degrees Celsius, symbolized former Sheriff Joe Arpaio's tough-on-crime style. But it was also at the heart of the Melendrez racial profiling lawsuit, resulting in federal court oversight. Arpaio's successor, Sheriff Penzone, closed Tent City in 2017, calling it a circus-like atmosphere and no longer cost-effective. Today, under Sheriff Russ Skinner's leadership, MCSO has declared a shift. On its official website, the office commits to improving community relations and learning from the past. A new division, the Division of Court Implementation, has been established to ensure compliance with court-ordered reforms. Community advisory boards have been set up to listen to the people's voices. The journey from a nationally controversial force to a law enforcement agency that respects the Constitution is still ongoing, showing that the fight against crime doesn't just take place on empty roads, it's a battle within the organization itself. As law enforcement continues to battle the growing criminal networks at the Arizona border, the stakes are higher than ever. Every operation reveals the depth of these complex operations, where human lives and narcotics are traded across the region. This ongoing fight is not just a local struggle, it's a national issue with far-reaching consequences. Stay tuned for more in-depth coverage on this hidden war. Like, share, and subscribe to Military Power for the latest updates on the fight against crime and the powerful forces shaping our world. Your next step is just one click away.